What I'm about to share with you is not a theory, and it is not based on some complicated treatment that requires a prescription. These are 5 practical habits that I have repeatedly recommended when talking about cancer prevention and long-term health, particularly for adults over 50. What makes them important is not simply that they sound healthy. Each one connects to a specific biological process inside your body, from DNA repair and inflammation to immune surveillance and cellular cleanup. And once you understand what those processes are doing every day, you begin to see why seemingly ordinary choices can have a much greater impact than most people realize. There is something about cancer prevention after 50 that deserves far more attention than it receives. Many people assume that once they reach a certain age, cancer risk is simply something they have to accept. But aging does not mean you are powerless. Your cells are constantly responding to the environment you create through your food, your sleep, your movement, your stress levels, and the timing of when you eat. These factors can influence inflammation, immune function, metabolic health, and the way your cells respond to damage. In other words, prevention is not about guaranteeing that cancer can never happen. It is about improving the biological conditions in which your body has to defend itself. Researchers have spent decades studying why some people develop cancer while others with similar ages and even similar genetic backgrounds do not. A major part of that research keeps bringing us back to lifestyle and the biological environment inside the body. Some large observational studies have found that people who consistently follow several healthy lifestyle behaviors can have substantially lower overall cancer risk than people who do not. The important point is that these behaviors work together. They are not isolated tricks. Improving one area can make another area easier for your body to manage, creating a pattern of protection rather than relying on a single intervention. So today, I want to walk you through 5 habits that can become part of that strategy, beginning with a habit that may seem almost too simple to matter. As we move through the list, each habit will build on the previous one. By the time we reach number 1, you will see how nutrition, sleep, movement, stress regulation, and meal timing can influence some of the same biological pathways from completely different directions. And that is where this becomes especially interesting. Let's begin with habit number 5. The first change I want you to consider is reducing your reliance on ultra-processed foods and replacing them with foods that are closer to their natural form. This sounds like basic nutrition advice, but there is a deeper reason it matters, particularly as we get older. Every cell in your body is constantly dividing, repairing itself, and replacing damaged components. Every time a cell copies its DNA, there is an opportunity for an error to occur. Fortunately, your body has sophisticated repair systems that function almost like a proofreading department. They identify certain mistakes in the genetic code and correct them before those mistakes can become permanent mutations. The challenge is that these repair systems do not operate in isolation. They function within an environment that can either support them or place additional stress on them. As we age, cellular repair becomes less efficient, while decades of normal cellular activity leave behind accumulated damage. That means the quality of the environment surrounding your cells becomes increasingly important. This is one reason I pay close attention to dietary patterns in adults over 50. Ultra-processed foods can include packaged snacks, many fast food products, processed meats, highly refined foods, and sugar-sweetened beverages. These foods can contribute to excessive calorie intake, metabolic problems, and chronic inflammation, and some may also expose the body to compounds generated during processing or high-temperature cooking. One group of compounds that has received significant scientific attention is advanced glycation end products, commonly called AGEs. These compounds can form when sugars react with proteins or fats, and excessive levels have been associated with oxidative stress and inflammatory signaling. The larger nutritional picture matters even more than any single compound. When most of your diet consists of heavily processed foods, you may be getting fewer vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and other foods that provide fiber and a wide range of protective nutrients. Fiber, for example, is not simply something that helps digestion. It interacts with the microorganisms living in your gut, and the substances produced when those microorganisms process certain fibers can influence immune and inflammatory pathways throughout the body. This is why I do not want you to think about healthy eating as a punishment or a list of foods you are no longer allowed to enjoy. Think of it as changing the raw materials you provide to your body. Instead of asking, "What am I taking away?" ask, "What am I giving my cells more often?" That shift in perspective can make a significant difference in how sustainable the habit becomes. Let me give you a practical example. Imagine someone over 50 who begins the morning with a highly sweetened packaged cereal, eats a processed deli sandwich for lunch, reaches for crackers or another packaged snack in the afternoon, and then finishes the evening with a heavily processed dinner. None of these foods automatically causes cancer by itself. That is not how cancer biology works. The concern is the repeated pattern over months and years. Now imagine changing just one component at each meal. Instead of a heavily sweetened cereal, choose oats with berries or another minimally processed breakfast. Instead of relying on processed deli meat every day, use grilled chicken, fish, beans, lentils, or eggs. Instead of a packaged snack, choose fruit and a small portion of nuts. Add vegetables and other fiber-rich foods whenever you can. These are not extreme changes. They are substitutions that gradually move the overall dietary pattern in a healthier direction. That is an important distinction because people often fail when they attempt to change everything overnight. You do not need to empty your kitchen and create an entirely new diet tomorrow morning. Start with one substitution at each meal. Make that change familiar. Then build from there. Consistency matters more than perfection. And there is another reason this habit matters. Chronic inflammation can influence many processes involved in aging and disease. Inflammation is not inherently bad. In fact, you need it when your body is fighting an infection or repairing an injury. The problem arises when inflammatory signaling remains elevated for long periods without an appropriate reason for it to stay switched on. A diet dominated by highly processed foods, combined with inactivity, poor sleep, excess body fat, and other metabolic stressors, can contribute to that environment. Now, I want to make something very clear. Changing your diet does not guarantee that you will never develop cancer. No responsible physician should make that promise. Cancer is complex, and genetics, environmental exposures, age, chance, infections, and many other factors can all contribute. But the evidence does support the idea that a healthier dietary pattern can improve several established risk factors and support overall metabolic and cardiovascular health. That alone makes it one of the most useful habits to begin with. And once you make this change, you create a foundation for the next habit because nutrition is only one part of the biological environment your cells experience every day. That brings us to habit number 4. And this one is frequently underestimated because most people think of sleep primarily as a way to feel less tired. But when you look at sleep from a biological perspective, it becomes much more interesting. While you are sleeping, your body is not simply shutting down for the night. Your brain, immune system, hormones, metabolism, and repair processes are all changing their activity. One of the most important concepts here is immune surveillance. Your immune system contains specialized cells, including natural killer cells, often called NK cells. These cells are part of the body's defense system and can recognize and attack certain abnormal or infected cells. They are not a perfect cancer prevention system, and they certainly do not guarantee protection from cancer, but they are an important component of normal immune function. Sleep appears to influence immune regulation, particularly through the architecture and consistency of your sleep. Deep sleep, sometimes referred to as slow-wave sleep, is associated with changes in hormone release, immune signaling, and tissue repair. Unfortunately, sleep architecture often changes with age. Many older adults spend less time in deep sleep than they did when they were younger, and fragmented sleep can make the problem worse. This is where the modern lifestyle can create another challenge. People stay up late watching television, checking phones, answering messages, working, worrying about tomorrow, or simply allowing inconsistent schedules to become normal. They may sleep 5 or 6 hours and convince themselves that they function perfectly well because they have adapted to it. But feeling accustomed to short sleep is not the same thing as proving that your body is receiving everything it needs. Several studies have associated chronic sleep restriction with changes in immune function and with increased risks of various health conditions. The exact relationship between sleep and cancer is complex, and researchers are still studying the mechanisms involved, but there is enough evidence to take chronic sleep deprivation seriously, especially when it becomes a long-term pattern. I once worked with the kind of patient who illustrates this perfectly, someone who appeared healthy in almost every obvious way. He was not significantly overweight, he did not smoke, he exercised regularly, his diet was reasonably good, but he routinely slept only 5 to 6 hours a night, and his sleep was fragmented. He considered this normal because he had been doing it for years. The first goal was not medication. It was to establish a consistent sleep routine, a regular bedtime and wake time, a darker bedroom, fewer bright screens late at night, a comfortable temperature, and, most importantly, enough time in bed to realistically allow 7 or more hours of sleep for most adults who need that amount. These changes are simple, but simple does not mean insignificant. If you want one starting point, focus on what sleep researchers often call an anchor. Choose a consistent wake time and protect it. Get up at approximately the same time each morning, including weekends. Your circadian system responds strongly to consistent timing, particularly through morning light exposure and regular daily routines. Once your wake time becomes stable, your bedtime often becomes easier to regulate as well. And notice how this connects directly to habit number 5. Better nutrition can support metabolic health and reduce some inflammatory pressures, while better sleep can support immune and hormonal regulation. These are not separate compartments. Your body experiences them simultaneously. But sleep is still only one piece of the picture. There is another habit that can directly influence metabolism, inflammation, insulin sensitivity, and the signaling pathways involved in cellular growth. And unlike what many people imagine when they hear the word exercise, it does not require a gym membership, expensive equipment, or intense workouts. That is where habit number 3 begins. When I talk about movement with patients over 50, I often have to change the way they think about the word exercise. The word itself can create resistance. People imagine a gym, heavy weights, running on a treadmill, or pushing themselves through a workout that leaves them exhausted. But that is not what I am asking you to do. What I am talking about is purposeful daily movement, the kind that fits into your ordinary life and can be repeated consistently without making you feel as though you are preparing for an athletic competition. Your body was designed to move throughout the day. Muscles contract, blood circulates, glucose is taken up by tissues, hormones shift, and inflammatory signals change every time you move. When you spend most of your waking hours sitting, you are not simply resting. Your metabolism changes in response to that inactivity. This becomes increasingly important after 50 because age-related changes in muscle mass, insulin sensitivity, and metabolic flexibility can make prolonged inactivity more consequential than it was earlier in life. One of the biological pathways that deserves attention here involves insulin-like growth factor 1, or IGF-1. IGF-1 is a naturally occurring hormone involved in growth, development, and tissue repair. You need it. The goal is not to eliminate it. The problem is that biological systems are rarely as simple as more is better or less is better. Persistent alterations in growth signaling can influence cell proliferation and other processes that researchers continue to study in relation to cancer. Regular physical activity appears to influence this environment in several beneficial ways. It can improve insulin sensitivity, help regulate blood glucose, reduce excess body fat, support muscle mass, and influence inflammatory signaling. Physical activity is also associated with improved immune function. These effects are part of the reason why movement has become such a consistent feature of cancer prevention recommendations. and you do not need to wait until you feel energetic to start. In fact, one of the biggest mistakes I see is that people make movement dependent on motivation. They tell themselves, "I'll start walking when I feel better," or "I'll exercise when I have more energy." But movement itself can help improve energy, mood, circulation, and metabolic function. The solution is to begin at a level that is realistic enough to repeat. For many adults, a brisk walk is an excellent starting point. Walking after a meal is particularly practical because it can help your muscles use circulating glucose at a time when blood sugar is naturally rising. Your muscles do not need to wait for insulin to do all the work. When you contract them, they can increase glucose uptake directly through pathways that are responsive to physical activity. That means a short walk after eating can be a simple way to improve the metabolic response to a meal. You can think of this as using your muscles as a metabolic organ. Every step requires energy. Your body has to move glucose and fatty acids into tissues, increase circulation, and coordinate multiple systems to support that movement. Over time, repeated bouts of activity can improve the way your body handles these fuels. This is one reason I like the idea of a 20-minute walk after your largest meal of the day. You do not need a special environment. You can walk around your neighborhood, inside your home, through a shopping center, or anywhere that allows you to move safely. If 20 minutes feels difficult, begin with 5 or 10. The important part is to create a pattern that can eventually become automatic. And then there is another strategy that is even easier for people who spend long periods sitting. Break up the sitting. Stand up, walk around the room, climb a few stairs if you can do so safely. Stretch. Perform a few minutes of light movement every hour. These small interruptions may seem insignificant, but they repeatedly remind your muscles and circulation that the body is supposed to be active. I remember working with an older patient who had completed treatment for an early-stage breast cancer and was understandably worried about recurrence. She had arthritis, which meant that traditional exercise programs were not realistic for her. Running was out of the question. High-intensity workouts were uncomfortable, but she could walk, stand, and perform gentle stretches. So we built the plan around her actual abilities rather than around an imaginary version of what exercise was supposed to look like. She walked for about 20 minutes after breakfast. In the evening, she stood and moved during portions of the television programs she watched. During long periods of reading, she would get up every hour and spend several minutes walking and stretching. The remarkable part was not that she suddenly became an athlete. She did not. What changed was that movement became part of her normal day. Over time, she reported better energy and greater mental clarity. Her overall physical function improved, and she felt less trapped by the fear that she had to do something extreme to protect herself. That is the lesson I want you to take from this. You do not need to become a different person to become more active. You need to make movement easier to repeat. The evidence also suggests that regular physical activity is associated with lower risks of several cancers and with better outcomes among people who have already been diagnosed with cancer. The exact effect varies depending on the cancer type, the person's health, the intensity of activity, and many other factors. So, I would never tell a patient that walking alone prevents cancer. That would be an irresponsible claim. But I can tell you that movement is one of the most consistently supported lifestyle behaviors for improving overall health and reducing several important cancer-related risk factors. And when you combine movement with the dietary changes we discussed earlier, the biology becomes even more interesting. Your body is simultaneously receiving better nutritional inputs while using energy more efficiently. Your muscles are taking up glucose. Your cardiovascular system is being challenged in a healthy way. Your inflammatory environment can improve. Your sleep can become more restorative, because regular daytime activity supports healthy sleep pressure. This is what I mean when I say these habits build on one another. But now we need to talk about something that many people completely underestimate. Something that cannot be measured simply by looking at your diet or counting your daily steps. Something that happens inside your nervous system and can influence hormones, immune function, sleep, and inflammation all at once. That brings us to habit number 2, managing chronic stress. When I say the word stress, many people immediately think of something vague. They imagine a meditation app, a wellness retreat, or someone telling them to just relax. And if that is how you understand stress management, I can understand why you might dismiss it. But chronic psychological stress is not merely an emotional experience. It has measurable biological consequences. Your body has an emergency response system that is designed to protect you. When you experience an immediate threat, your nervous system becomes more alert, your heart rate increases, and hormones such as cortisol are released. This is useful when the response is short-lived. Your body is essentially saying, "There is a problem. Focus your resources here." The problem begins when the alarm never fully switches off. For someone experiencing persistent financial pressure, loneliness, grief, caregiving responsibilities, unresolved conflict, chronic anxiety, or another prolonged source of distress, the body can remain in a state of heightened physiological activation. Cortisol is one of the major hormones involved in this response. Again, cortisol itself is not your enemy. You need it for normal daily function. The concern is chronic dysregulation. Persistent stress can influence immune signaling, glucose metabolism, blood pressure, sleep, appetite, and inflammatory pathways. It can also make healthy behaviors more difficult. Someone who is exhausted and chronically stressed is more likely to sleep poorly, move less, eat impulsively, and rely on alcohol or other unhealthy coping mechanisms. That creates a biological feedback loop in which one problem reinforces another. This is why I consider stress management a medical intervention in the broad sense of the word. It is not because breathing exercises or relaxation techniques magically destroy cancer cells. They do not. The value comes from helping regulate the systems that chronic stress can disrupt. Researchers have been studying how stress hormones interact with the immune system and with pathways involved in inflammation and cellular survival. Some laboratory and observational research has identified relationships between chronic stress, immune dysfunction, and cancer biology. But we need to be careful here because the evidence does not mean that stress directly causes every cancer or that eliminating stress guarantees cancer prevention. Cancer is far too complex for such a simple explanation. What we can say is that chronic stress is harmful to health, and reducing it can improve multiple systems that matter for long-term resilience. Think about your immune system as an enormous communication network. Immune cells are constantly receiving signals telling them when to activate, when to move, when to calm down, and what targets deserve attention. Chronic physiological stress can alter that communication. It can shift inflammatory signaling and affect how immune cells function. That matters because your immune system is part of your body's ongoing surveillance process. Every day, cells become damaged, old cells are removed, and abnormal cellular changes can occur. Most of these events never become cancer. Your body has multiple layers of defense that identify, repair, remove, or contain abnormal cells. Supporting those defenses means taking care of the environment in which they operate. One practical starting point is surprisingly simple: slow breathing. You do not need a complicated technique. Sit somewhere quiet, relax your shoulders, breathe slowly through your nose, allowing your abdomen to expand gently. Then exhale slowly and completely. The purpose is not to force yourself into a particular emotional state. The purpose is to give your nervous system a repeated signal that it is safe to reduce its level of activation. Some people use structured breathing patterns, such as breathing in for 4 counts, holding briefly, and then extending the exhalation. If holding your breath feels uncomfortable, there is no reason to force it. A slower, comfortable breathing rhythm is perfectly reasonable. The most important variable is consistency. Start with 10 to 12 minutes a day. You can do it in the morning before the day becomes busy. You can do it during a quiet period in the afternoon, or you can use it in the evening as a transition between the demands of the day and the beginning of your nighttime routine. And then add another element that has nothing to do with technology: human connection. Social isolation is increasingly recognized as an important health concern, particularly in older adults. Regular contact with friends, family, neighbors, or community groups can provide emotional support and reduce the sense that every problem has to be carried alone. A weekly meal with people you trust may sound unrelated to cancer biology, but the human nervous system does not separate emotional and physical health as neatly as we sometimes pretend. A patient I remember particularly well had recently retired after a long executive career. He told me that he had never been happier because he finally had no deadlines, but when we looked more carefully at his daily routine, we found something different. His schedule had disappeared. He no longer had a consistent morning structure. His sleep became irregular. His social contact declined. He spent more time alone, and his body was showing signs of chronic physiological stress, even though he did not describe himself as emotionally distressed. This is an important concept called allostatic load. In simple terms, it refers to the cumulative wear associated with repeated or prolonged physiological responses to stress. You do not always have to feel overwhelmed for your body to be experiencing a high stress burden. We created a simple daily routine, a period of slow breathing each morning, a short evening walk without a phone, and a regular weekly dinner with friends. Nothing about the plan was dramatic, but the structure gave his nervous system predictable periods of lower stimulation and gave him regular opportunities for social connection. Over time, his sleep improved, his daily rhythm became more stable, and several markers associated with stress and inflammation moved in a healthier direction. This is why I want you to be cautious about the phrase, "I don't feel stressed." Stress is not measured only by how calm you believe you are. Your sleep, blood pressure, heart rate, activity level, mood, appetite, and daily routine can all provide clues about how your body is responding. And now we can see how the 5 habits are beginning to connect. Better food choices can support metabolic and inflammatory health. Better sleep supports immune regulation and recovery. Daily movement improves glucose handling, physical function, and metabolic health. Stress regulation helps prevent your nervous system from remaining in a prolonged state of physiological activation. But there is still one more piece. There is a habit that involves something we all do every single day: eating. Not simply what you eat, but when you eat. The timing of your meals can influence metabolic signals, insulin levels, circadian rhythms, and the periods during which your body is either processing incoming nutrients or shifting into a different physiological state. And this is where we arrive at habit number 1. If you have followed me this far, I want you to understand that I am not talking about a crash diet, starvation, or an extreme fasting challenge. Those approaches can be inappropriate or even dangerous for certain people, particularly older adults, people taking glucose-lowering medications, people who are underweight, and people with specific medical conditions. What I am talking about is much more practical: creating a consistent daily period during which you eat, followed by a consistent overnight period during which you do not consume calories. The reason researchers are interested in this approach is that your metabolism responds not only to the amount of food you consume, but also to the timing of that intake. During the fed state, your body is processing nutrients, storing energy, and responding to hormones such as insulin. During a longer period without food, those signals begin to change. Insulin levels generally fall, stored energy becomes more available, and several cellular maintenance pathways become more active. One of the pathways receiving enormous scientific attention is autophagy. The word comes from Greek roots meaning self-eating, but that phrase can make the process sound much more frightening than it actually is. Autophagy is better understood as a cellular recycling and quality control system. Your cells identify damaged or unnecessary components, break them down, and reuse some of their building blocks. It is one of the ways your cells maintain internal quality. As we age, cellular maintenance becomes increasingly important because damage accumulates over time. Mitochondria can become less efficient, proteins can misfold, cellular components can become damaged. Your body has systems for dealing with these problems, and autophagy is one of them. The scientific question is how much different eating patterns influence autophagy in humans, and whether changes in autophagy directly translate in lower cancer risk. That research is still developing. Much of the strongest mechanistic evidence comes from laboratory and animal studies, while human studies are beginning to clarify how time-restricted eating affects metabolic health and related pathways. So I want to be very precise here. Fasting is not a proven cure for cancer, and there is no scientifically responsible way to promise that a particular fasting schedule will prevent cancer. But consistent meal timing may offer meaningful metabolic benefits for some adults, and those benefits can become especially relevant as we age. A practical approach for many healthy adults is to establish a daily eating window that fits naturally into their schedule, rather than trying to force an extreme fasting period. For example, if you normally eat breakfast at 8 in the morning, you might aim to finish dinner around 6 in the evening. That creates a 14-hour overnight period without calories while keeping the daytime eating period reasonably structured. But even here, individual circumstances matter. If you have diabetes and use insulin or medications that can cause low blood sugar, you should not begin a fasting routine without discussing it with your clinician. If you have a history of an eating disorder, are underweight, have significant nutritional deficiencies, or have another medical condition that makes prolonged fasting inappropriate, the strategy may need to be modified or avoided. The goal is not to win a fasting competition. The goal is to create a sustainable rhythm that allows your body to spend some time processing nutrients and some time in a post-absorptive state. And this brings us to one of the most interesting ideas in the entire discussion: synergy. Meal timing can influence metabolic pathways that are also affected by movement and diet. Movement improves glucose handling. A healthier diet can reduce the nutritional burden associated with highly processed foods. Better sleep supports circadian regulation. Stress management can reduce physiological disruption. When these behaviors occur together, they create a much more coherent environment for healthy aging than any one behavior can provide by itself. This is why I do not want you to leave this video thinking that there is one magical habit that makes everything else unnecessary. There isn't. The most powerful strategy is the one you can sustain. And when we put all 5 habits together, the picture becomes much clearer. Habit number 5 is improving the quality of the foods you eat and reducing your dependence on ultra-processed products. Habit number 4 is protecting your sleep and giving your immune and repair systems enough time to function properly. Habit number 3 is moving your body consistently, particularly breaking up long periods of sitting and walking after meals. Habit number 2 is reducing the physiological burden of chronic stress through breathing, routine, movement, and meaningful human connection. And habit number 1 is establishing a consistent eating rhythm that gives your metabolism a predictable overnight period without calories. These are not 5 isolated tricks. They are 5 ways of supporting the same larger goal: creating an internal environment in which your cells have better access to repair, regulation, immune surveillance, metabolic stability, and normal turnover. And perhaps the most important point is that you do not have to wait for the perfect Monday, the next doctor's appointment, or the beginning of a new year. You can begin with one meal. You can begin with one walk. You can begin by setting a consistent wake time tomorrow morning. You can sit quietly for 10 minutes and breathe. You can decide that the kitchen closes at a reasonable hour tonight. These choices may look small when viewed individually, but biology is built on repeated signals. The signals you give your body once do not define your health. The signals you repeat, day after day and year after year, are the ones that can gradually shape your metabolic environment. And that is why the final step is not about adding more information. It is about turning what you now understand into a routine you can actually live with. Because prevention is not a single event. It is a pattern. The reason this matters so much is that your body is not waiting for you to make one perfect decision. Your cells are responding to what you do repeatedly. Every meal sends a metabolic signal. Every night of sleep sends another signal. Every period of movement, every long period of sitting, every stressful day, and every period of recovery changes the internal environment in which your cells operate. When you understand that, prevention becomes much less about searching for one miracle intervention and much more about repeatedly giving your biology the conditions it needs to function well. This is particularly important after 50 because aging changes the way your body handles stress. Muscle mass gradually becomes harder to maintain. Insulin sensitivity can decline. Sleep can become more fragmented. Recovery from physical activity may take longer. Hormonal rhythms can shift. The immune system also undergoes changes over time. None of this means that decline is inevitable or that you should simply accept poor health as a normal consequence of getting older. It means your daily habits become increasingly valuable because they can help support the systems that are changing. Let's return for a moment to the idea of cellular cleanup, because this is where many conversations about fasting become unnecessarily complicated. Autophagy is not an on and off switch that suddenly turns on at a specific hour and begins destroying cancer cells. Biology rarely works that way. Autophagy is a continuous process, and its activity changes according to factors such as nutrient availability, energy status, hormones, exercise, sleep, and cellular stress. Fasting can influence some of these signals, but the exact timing and magnitude of autophagy in humans are still being studied. That distinction matters because I do not want you to follow a rigid fasting rule simply because someone on the internet told you that your cells begin cleaning out cancer at a particular hour. That is an oversimplification. The scientific evidence is much more nuanced. What we do know is that time-restricted eating can improve several metabolic markers in some people, especially when it helps them reduce late-night eating and establish a more consistent daily rhythm. Think about what happens when someone eats continuously from early morning until late at night. Perhaps they have breakfast at 7, a snack at 10, lunch at 1, another snack at 4, dinner at 8, and then something sweet while watching television at 10. Their body is repeatedly receiving nutritional signals throughout most of the day. Now compare that with someone whose meals are concentrated into a consistent 10 or 12-hour period and who finishes eating several hours before going to bed. The second person is giving the body a much longer period without incoming calories. That does not automatically make the second person healthier. Food quality, total nutrition, activity, sleep, medications, and individual health conditions still matter. But for some adults, reducing the amount of time spent eating can improve metabolic organization and make healthy eating easier. This is where consistency becomes more important than perfection again. If you normally eat late at night, you do not necessarily need to move immediately to an aggressive fasting schedule. You could start by eliminating the unnecessary evening snack. Then you could move dinner slightly earlier. Then you could establish a regular breakfast time. Over several weeks, the eating window may naturally become shorter without the experience feeling like a punishment. For example, if your first calories normally arrive at 7 in the morning and your last calories arrive at 10 at night, begin by moving that final meal or snack earlier. Perhaps the kitchen closes at 8:30. Once that feels normal, move it toward 8. Your goal is to create a predictable rhythm that works with your life. And there is another detail that often gets overlooked: what you drink. If you are trying to establish an overnight fasting period, a beverage containing sugar, cream, milk, or significant calories technically interrupts that fast. Water is the simplest choice. Unsweetened tea can also work for many people. Black coffee is commonly included in time-restricted eating approaches, although individual tolerance and medical circumstances should always be considered. Again, the objective is not to become obsessed with whether a tiny amount of calories has broken your fast. The objective is to reduce unnecessary eating across the entire evening and create a consistent overnight period without calories. That may sound almost too ordinary to be important, but ordinary habits are often the ones that survive. Now, there is another reason I want you to think about meal timing alongside sleep. Your circadian rhythm does not only respond to light. Food timing is also one of the signals that helps organize metabolic rhythms. When meals happen at wildly different times every day, particularly when substantial calories are consumed late at night, your metabolic schedule can become less predictable. This is one reason I encourage patients to establish regularity. Wake around the same time, eat around similar times, move during the day, get exposure to natural light in the morning, reduce bright screens and stimulating activity before bed, finish your last substantial meal well before sleep when possible. None of these steps is a miracle cure. Together, however, they create a much more coherent daily rhythm. And that is what we are really trying to accomplish. A healthy body is not simply a body that has no abnormal cells. Cells become damaged every day. The important question is what happens next. Does the cell repair itself? Does the immune system recognize it? Does the cell enter a normal programmed death pathway when it is too damaged to survive safely? Does the body remove the damaged material? Does inflammation resolve after it has served its purpose, or does the abnormal environment continue year after year? Cancer develops through a complicated combination of genetic changes, environmental influences, immune interactions, tissue conditions, and time. There is no single switch that turns cancer on or off, but that does not make prevention meaningless. It makes prevention multidimensional. This is why I want you to stop looking for the one food, supplement, exercise, or fasting schedule that supposedly eliminates cancer risk. That is not how evidence-based medicine works. If someone tells you that a particular ingredient will kill cancer cells in your body, ask a simple question. What evidence shows that eating that ingredient in a normal human diet prevents cancer or improves survival? Laboratory research can be interesting, but what happens to an isolated cancer cell in a laboratory dish is not the same thing as what happens inside a human being. The same caution applies to fasting. Research into fasting and cellular stress responses is fascinating. Scientists have identified pathways involving nutrient sensing, energy balance, cellular recycling, and metabolic regulation that may be relevant to healthy aging. But promising mechanisms do not automatically become proven cancer prevention treatments. What makes the approach worthwhile is that many of the behaviors involved have benefits that extend far beyond cancer. Better meal timing can support metabolic health. Regular movement supports cardiovascular health, muscle strength, balance, and insulin sensitivity. Good sleep supports cognition, mood, immune function, and cardiovascular health. Stress regulation can improve blood pressure, sleep, emotional well-being, and daily functioning. A diet centered on minimally processed foods provides fiber, vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients that support many systems simultaneously. This is what I mean by a biological strategy. You are not trying to manipulate one pathway. You are supporting the entire system. And perhaps nowhere is this more important than with inflammation. Inflammation is one of the body's most useful defense mechanisms. When you cut your finger, immune cells arrive, blood vessels change, and chemical signals coordinate the repair process. Once the job is done, the inflammatory response should begin to resolve. Chronic inflammation is different. It is a state in which inflammatory signals remain elevated or repeatedly activated over long periods. This can happen for many reasons, including obesity, metabolic dysfunction, smoking, chronic infections, poor sleep, inactivity, and certain dietary patterns. The goal is not to eliminate inflammation. You cannot and should not. The goal is to prevent unnecessary chronic inflammatory activation. And this is where the habits begin to overlap again. A person who replaces highly processed foods with vegetables, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, and other minimally processed foods may improve their overall nutritional profile. A person who sleeps consistently may improve hormonal and immune regulation. A person who walks after meals may improve glucose handling. A person who reduces chronic stress may improve autonomic balance and sleep. A person who avoids constant late-night eating may create a more consistent metabolic rhythm. None of these changes has to be perfect. What matters is the direction. If you are currently sleeping 5 hours, moving very little, eating late at night, consuming highly processed foods throughout the day, and living under constant stress, you do not need to transform all 5 areas tomorrow. That would be overwhelming. Instead, choose one behavior that is easiest to control. Maybe that is a 10-minute walk after dinner. Maybe it is replacing your afternoon packaged snack with fruit and nuts. Maybe it is turning off your television 30 minutes earlier. Maybe it is closing the kitchen after dinner. Maybe it is sitting quietly and breathing for 10 minutes before beginning your day. The smallest sustainable behavior is often more valuable than the largest behavior you abandon after 3 days. And there is another point that becomes particularly important after 50: muscle. When people hear the word cancer prevention, they often think only about food and weight, but maintaining muscle is a major component of healthy aging. Muscle is metabolically active tissue. It helps regulate glucose, supports mobility, protects independence, and provides a reserve that becomes extremely valuable when the body experiences illness. This is one reason daily movement matters, even if your primary goal is cancer prevention. Walking is excellent, but if you are physically able, resistance training should also have a place in your long-term health plan. You do not necessarily need a gym. Body weight movements, resistance bands, light weights, or supervised strength exercises can all be useful depending on your health and physical abilities. The goal after 50 is not simply to weigh less. It is to remain capable. Can you get up from a chair without using your hands? Can you carry groceries? Can you climb stairs safely? Can you walk for 20 or 30 minutes? Can you maintain your balance? Can you perform basic daily activities without becoming exhausted? These functional measures tell us something important about biological resilience, and that resilience matters when the body faces disease. This is why I would never recommend that an older adult pursue aggressive weight loss at the expense of muscle and nutrition, simply because they believe being lighter automatically means being healthier. In some cases, losing excess body fat is beneficial, but preserving muscle, getting adequate protein, and maintaining physical function are equally important. The same principle applies to fasting. If restricting your eating window causes you to consume too little protein, too few calories, or insufficient nutrients, then the strategy may be working against your health rather than supporting it. Older adults have a particular need to protect muscle because age-related muscle loss can accelerate when protein intake and physical activity are inadequate. So, if you choose time-restricted eating, your meals still need to be nutritionally complete. That means including adequate protein from appropriate sources, plenty of vegetables, fiber-rich carbohydrates when appropriate, healthy fats, and enough total nutrition to meet your individual needs. The fasting period is not the goal. Healthy physiology is the goal. This is an important distinction because the internet has a tendency to turn every health behavior into a competition. Longer fasting is portrayed as better, more exercise is portrayed as better, eating fewer calories is portrayed as better, sleeping less is sometimes celebrated as productivity. But biology does not reward extremes simply because they are extreme. Your body responds to balance, adaptation, and recovery. And when we look at cancer prevention, that principle becomes even more important because cancer itself is not one disease. Breast cancer, colorectal cancer, prostate cancer, lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, and blood cancers have different risk factors and different biological mechanisms. A behavior that strongly influences one type of cancer may have a much smaller effect on another. That is why broad lifestyle strategies are so useful. They do not depend on one narrow mechanism. They support cardiovascular health. They support metabolic health. They support immune function. They support physical function. They support healthy aging. And all of those systems intersect with cancer risk in different ways. There is also something else I want every adult over 50 to remember. Lifestyle prevention does not replace screening. This is absolutely critical. Even if you eat well, sleep 7 or 8 hours, walk every day, manage stress, and maintain a healthy weight, you still need age-appropriate medical care. Screening can identify certain cancers or precancerous changes before symptoms develop. Depending on your age, sex, family history, and individual risk factors, that may include colorectal cancer screening, breast cancer screening, cervical cancer screening, prostate discussions, lung cancer screening for certain high-risk smokers, skin examinations, or other evaluations recommended by your healthcare professional. Prevention and early detection are not competing strategies. They work together. Lifestyle can help reduce risk. Screening can help identify disease earlier. Medical care can address conditions that lifestyle alone cannot correct. And knowing your family history can help determine whether you need additional surveillance. If you have a strong family history of cancer, especially cancers occurring unusually early or affecting multiple close relatives, that information should be discussed with your physician. Genetic counseling or testing may sometimes be appropriate. This is another reason I do not want you to interpret any lifestyle recommendation as a guarantee. You can do everything right and still develop cancer. And you can have an imperfect lifestyle and never receive a cancer diagnosis. That does not mean prevention is useless. It means risk is not destiny, and biology is not a simple equation. Our responsibility is to influence the factors we can influence while remaining realistic about the factors we cannot control. So, if you are over 50 and listening to this right now, I want you to think about your current routine without judging yourself. Ask yourself what your body is experiencing on an average Tuesday. What time do you wake up? How much natural light do you get in the morning? When is your first meal? How much of your food comes from packages? How long do you sit without getting up? How many hours do you sleep? Do you wake repeatedly during the night? When was the last time you had an uninterrupted conversation with someone you care about? When do you stop eating? These questions may sound simple, but together they provide a surprisingly detailed picture of your daily biological environment. And once you can see that environment clearly, you can begin changing it. You do not need to become perfect. You need to become intentional. That is the real message behind these 5 habits. They are not magic. They are not guarantees. They are not substitutes for medical care. They are practical ways to support the systems your body already uses to maintain itself. Your DNA repair machinery is already working. Your immune system is already monitoring your tissues. Your muscles are already capable of using glucose. Your nervous system is already responding to stress. Your cells are already performing maintenance and recycling damaged components. The question is whether your daily environment makes those processes easier or harder. And after 50, that question becomes increasingly important. Because every year brings more accumulated cellular history. But every year also gives you another opportunity to influence what happens next. That is why it is never too late to start. The fact that it is never too late to start is not just a comforting phrase. It is one of the most useful principles in preventive medicine. Your body continues to adapt throughout life. Muscles respond to resistance and movement. Blood sugar can improve when activity and nutrition improve. Sleep can become more consistent when your daily rhythm changes. Blood pressure can respond to healthier habits. And your cardiovascular system remains responsive to physical activity even in older age. The body may not respond exactly the way it did at 25, but it does not stop responding simply because you have reached 50, 60, or 70. That is why I want you to be careful with the idea that your past determines your future. Perhaps you spent decades eating poorly. Perhaps you smoked earlier in life. Perhaps you were sedentary for years. Perhaps you ignored your sleep because you were raising children, building a career, or caring for someone else. Those years are part of your history, but they do not mean that every future year has to look the same. The goal of prevention is not to erase the past. It is to change the direction of the future. And sometimes the most powerful change begins with something almost embarrassingly simple. A walk. Not a marathon, not a complicated exercise program. Just a walk. Imagine finishing dinner and instead of sitting down immediately, you put on your shoes and walk for 15 or 20 minutes. You are moving your muscles at exactly the time when your body is processing the meal you just consumed. Your muscles begin taking up glucose, your circulation increases, you are spending a little energy instead of remaining completely sedentary, and when you repeat that behavior hundreds of times over the course of a year, it becomes much more than a walk. It becomes a physiological signal. Now imagine another small change. Instead of eating something from a package every afternoon, you choose an apple, berries, carrots, a handful of nuts, or another minimally processed option. Again, one decision does not transform your cancer risk. But repeated hundreds of times, that substitution changes the overall nutritional pattern of your diet. Then imagine protecting your sleep. You choose a consistent wake time. You get morning light. You stop scrolling through your phone late at night. You make your bedroom darker and quieter. You give yourself enough time to sleep. Again, no single night changes your biology permanently, but a year of better sleep is very different from a year of chronic sleep deprivation. This is the part of prevention that is difficult to communicate because humans naturally prefer dramatic interventions. We want the pill, we want the supplement, we want the food that supposedly switches on a powerful gene or destroys a dangerous cell. But the human body is not waiting for a miracle ingredient. It is responding to thousands of ordinary signals every day. That is why the 5 habits we have discussed should be viewed as a system rather than as a checklist. The first habit, establishing a consistent eating window, can help organize your daily metabolic rhythm. The second, managing chronic stress, can reduce unnecessary physiological activation and support better sleep and recovery. The third, purposeful movement, keeps muscles active, improves glucose handling, and supports physical resilience. The fourth, protecting sleep, provides an important period for immune, hormonal, and restorative processes. And the fifth, reducing ultra-processed foods, improves the nutritional environment in which all of these systems operate. Notice how closely they overlap. A person who eats better may sleep better. A person who sleeps better may have more energy to move. A person who moves more may regulate blood sugar more effectively. Better metabolic control can make it easier to maintain a healthy weight. A healthier weight can reduce some inflammatory pressures. Lower stress can make sleep easier. Better sleep can improve emotional regulation. And when all of these changes reinforce each other, the result can be far greater than the effect of any single behavior considered alone. This is why I am not interested in telling you that one habit is responsible for everything. It is much more accurate to say that healthy habits create an environment in which multiple protective systems can function more effectively. And that brings us back to cancer. Cancer is fundamentally a disease of abnormal cell behavior. Cells acquire changes that allow them to grow when they should stop, survive when they should die, invade tissues they should not invade, and sometimes spread to distant parts of the body. The process is usually not instantaneous. It can develop over many years. That means there can also be a long period during which the body is constantly repairing, monitoring, removing, and replacing cells before a clinically detectable tumor ever appears. This is one reason prevention deserves attention even when you feel completely healthy. You cannot feel DNA damage happening. You cannot feel immune cells performing surveillance. You cannot feel inflammatory molecules moving through your bloodstream. You cannot feel your circadian rhythm shifting. And you certainly cannot feel every metabolic change caused by sitting for 8 or 10 hours. The absence of symptoms does not mean nothing is happening. That statement works both ways. It does not mean that every invisible biological change is dangerous. And it does not mean that you are developing cancer simply because you had a poor night's sleep or ate fast food yesterday. What matters is the long-term pattern. This is an important distinction because health information online often encourages unnecessary fear. Someone eats a particular food and immediately worries that they have caused cancer. Someone misses a workout and thinks they have ruined their health. Someone eats late one night and believes they have completely shut down their body's ability to repair itself. That is not how human physiology works. Your body is remarkably resilient. The problem is not an occasional imperfect decision. The problem is when unhealthy patterns become the default for years. So if you are listening to this and thinking, I have already done too much damage, I want you to stop thinking in those terms. You are not a machine that has reached a permanent point of no return. Your body is continuously adapting to the environment you create. That does not erase every risk factor, but it means your choices still matter. Now, let's talk about another part of cancer prevention that is often left out of lifestyle discussions: alcohol and tobacco. If you smoke, quitting remains one of the most powerful things you can do for your health. Smoking is directly linked to multiple cancers, including lung cancer and several cancers of the mouth, throat, esophagus, bladder, pancreas, and other organs. The risk does not disappear instantly when you quit, but it declines over time, and quitting at any age can provide meaningful health benefits. Alcohol is also relevant because alcohol consumption is associated with increased risk for several cancers. The relationship depends on the amount and pattern of drinking, but there is no need to pretend that alcohol is a cancer prevention strategy. If you drink, reducing your intake can be a reasonable risk reduction step, and for some people, avoiding alcohol altogether may be the healthiest choice. These factors were not among the 5 habits we focused on because I wanted to concentrate on behaviors that are often underestimated. But they belong in the larger picture. The same applies to excess sun exposure. If you spend significant time outdoors, protecting your skin from excessive ultraviolet radiation is another practical cancer prevention measure. Hats, shade, protective clothing, and appropriate sunscreen can all reduce exposure. Skin cancer is common, and repeated ultraviolet damage can accumulate over time. Again, prevention is rarely one thing. It is a collection of decisions that reduce avoidable risk while supporting the body's natural defenses. And there is one more area I want you to take seriously: your medications and supplements. If you are taking multiple medications, do not begin a fasting regimen, high-dose supplement routine, or major dietary restriction without considering how it could interact with your treatment. For example, some medications need to be taken with food. Others can affect blood glucose. Some supplements can alter how medications are absorbed or metabolized, and certain natural products are not necessarily safe simply because they come from a plant. This is especially important after 50 because many people begin accumulating medications for blood pressure, cholesterol, diabetes, arthritis, sleep, or other chronic conditions. Your health plan has to fit your actual medical situation. This is why I always encourage people to bring a complete list of medications and supplements to their medical appointments. It sounds mundane, but it can prevent important mistakes. And if you are considering a fasting routine, tell your clinician exactly what you intend to do. Do not simply say, "I'm eating healthier." Explain the schedule. For example, I plan to eat between 8 in the morning and 6 in the evening, and outside that period I will drink water and unsweetened beverages. That gives your healthcare professional enough information to evaluate whether your medications need adjustment. The same principle applies to exercise. If you have chest pain, unexplained shortness of breath, severe dizziness, significant joint limitations, or another concerning symptom, do not simply push through it because someone online told you that exercise prevents cancer. Get evaluated. There is no health benefit in turning a safe walking program into an unsafe one. And this is why I keep returning to the word purposeful. Purposeful movement does not mean reckless movement. Purposeful eating does not mean restrictive eating. Purposeful fasting does not mean starvation. Purposeful stress management does not mean pretending that serious emotional problems can be solved with 5 minutes of breathing. Purposeful sleep means respecting the biological need for adequate recovery. The goal is intelligent consistency. That is the foundation of preventive medicine. Now, Let's return to the question of why these habits become increasingly important after 50. Aging is associated with a gradual accumulation of cellular changes. Some are normal consequences of living, some are influenced by genetics, some are influenced by environmental exposures, some are influenced by metabolic health, and some are simply the result of random biological events. Your body has multiple systems designed to respond to this accumulated damage. DNA repair systems identify and correct certain forms of genetic damage. The immune system can identify and eliminate abnormal cells. Programmed cell death can remove cells that are too damaged to function safely. Autophagy helps recycle damaged cellular components. The liver and kidneys process and eliminate many substances. The gut and its microbial ecosystem interact continuously with the immune system and metabolism. The endocrine system regulates energy use, growth, stress, and reproduction. These systems are not independent. They communicate constantly, and lifestyle affects the communication between them. That is why the 5 habits we have discussed are more powerful when they are combined. For example, poor sleep can make you hungrier and less likely to exercise. That can make weight management more difficult. Poor dietary quality can contribute to metabolic dysfunction. Metabolic dysfunction can make energy levels less stable. Low energy can reduce movement. Chronic stress can worsen sleep, and the cycle continues. The opposite is also possible. A short daily walk can improve sleep. Better sleep can improve energy. More energy can make movement easier. Regular movement can improve appetite regulation and glucose control. A healthier diet can support recovery. Stress regulation can make it easier to maintain the routine. The cycle begins reinforcing itself in the opposite direction. This is what makes habit formation so important. You are not simply collecting healthy behaviors. You are creating feedback loops. And the best feedback loops are the ones that require the least willpower. If your walking shoes are by the door, you are more likely to walk. If fruit is visible and packaged snacks are less accessible, you are more likely to choose the fruit. If your phone stays outside the bedroom, you are less likely to scroll at midnight. If your dinner schedule is predictable, you are less likely to snack randomly late at night. If your breathing practice happens immediately after another established morning habit, you are more likely to remember it. This is behavioral science, but it is also practical medicine. The environment around you can either support the behavior you want or make it harder. So instead of constantly asking yourself to have more discipline, redesign the environment. Make the healthy choice easier. Make the unhealthy choice slightly less convenient. Small changes in friction can have enormous effects over time. And now I want to address something that may be even more important than all of these individual recommendations. Do not wait for motivation. Motivation is temporary. A routine is more reliable. You will not wake up every morning excited to exercise. You will not always feel like eating vegetables. You will sometimes want the dessert. You will have stressful days. You will have nights when your sleep is disrupted. You will travel. You will attend celebrations. You will get sick. Life will interfere. The goal is not to prevent life from happening. The goal is to return to the routine after the disruption. If you eat an unhealthy meal, your next meal can still be healthy. If you miss a walk, you can walk tomorrow. If you sleep poorly tonight, you can protect your sleep schedule tomorrow night. If you become overwhelmed by stress, you can return to your breathing practice. If you eat late one evening, you do not need to punish yourself with an extreme fast the next day. That is what sustainable prevention looks like. It is flexible enough to survive real life. And this is particularly important for adults over 50 because health is not a short-term project. You are not trying to achieve a perfect body for a photograph next month. You are trying to preserve function, independence, and biological resilience for the next decade and beyond. That changes the question. Instead of asking, "How quickly can I lose weight?" ask, "What can I still do when I am 70?" Instead of asking, how little can I eat? Ask, how can I nourish my body while maintaining muscle? Instead of asking, how hard can I exercise? Ask, how can I keep moving safely for the rest of my life? Instead of asking, how little sleep can I survive on? Ask, how can I protect my recovery? And instead of asking, how much stress can I tolerate? Ask, what can I change so that my nervous system does not have to stay in emergency mode every day? Those questions lead to a completely different approach to aging. You are no longer fighting your body. You are working with it. And that, ultimately, is what these 5 habits are about. They are not about controlling every variable. They are about improving the variables you can control. You cannot control your age. You cannot control every gene you inherited. You cannot control every environmental exposure you have experienced. You cannot control every random mutation that occurs in a cell. But you can influence what you eat most days. You can influence whether you move. You can influence your sleep environment. You can influence how you respond to chronic stress. You can influence when you eat. And you can make sure you participate in appropriate screening and medical care. That is a powerful position to be in. Because prevention does not require certainty. It requires action. And perhaps that is the most important message I can leave you with today. You do not need to control every part of your biology to improve your health. You do not need perfect genetics. You do not need an expensive program. You do not need a cabinet full of supplements. And you certainly do not need to believe that aging automatically means surrendering control. What you need is a willingness to consistently support the systems that are already working inside your body. Your cells are constantly making decisions. They repair certain forms of damage. They remove components that are no longer useful. Your immune system continually surveys tissues. Your muscles respond to movement. Your metabolism responds to the timing and composition of your meals. Your nervous system responds to the stress and recovery signals you experience throughout the day. Your sleep provides a period in which many of these systems can shift into maintenance and recovery. None of this requires you to consciously control it. Your body is already doing the work. The question is whether your daily habits are helping or interfering with those processes. That is why I want you to remember the 5 habits as a connected strategy rather than 5 separate rules. Start with your food. Reduce the amount of ultra-processed food that dominates your meals and replace it with foods that provide fiber, protein, healthy fats, vitamins, minerals, and other nutrients your body can actually use. You do not have to eliminate every packaged food from your life. You simply want the overall pattern to move toward foods that are closer to their natural form. Then protect your sleep. Give yourself enough time to sleep. Keep your wake time reasonably consistent. Get natural light during the day, particularly in the morning. Reduce unnecessary stimulation before bed. Make the bedroom a place associated with sleep rather than work, news, or endless scrolling. If you regularly snore loudly, wake gasping, experience severe daytime sleepiness, or repeatedly wake during the night, talk with your healthcare professional because an untreated sleep disorder can interfere with the quality of your recovery. Keep moving. Walk after meals when you can. Break up long periods of sitting. Build strength if your physical condition allows it. Maintain your balance and mobility. You do not have to train like an athlete. Your goal is to preserve the physical capacity that allows you to live independently and respond to the challenges that come with aging. Manage chronic stress. Do not wait until you are completely overwhelmed. Create small periods of recovery during the day. Slow your breathing. Spend time outside. Walk without your phone. Talk to people you trust. Maintain meaningful social connections. If anxiety, depression, grief, trauma, or another emotional burden is interfering with your ability to function, seek professional help. Stress management is not about pretending serious problems do not exist. It is about giving your nervous system appropriate opportunities to recover and getting help when you need it. And finally, establish a reasonable eating rhythm. Avoid turning every evening into an extension of the daytime eating period. If appropriate for your health, Create a consistent overnight period without calories. But remember that fasting is a tool, not a test of discipline. If you have diabetes, take glucose-lowering medication. Are underweight, have nutritional concerns, have a history of an eating disorder, or have another medical condition that makes fasting inappropriate, discuss it with your clinician first. These 5 habits are not intended to replace medical treatment. They are intended to support it. That distinction matters enormously. If you have high blood pressure, lifestyle changes can help, but you should not stop your medication without medical guidance. If you have diabetes, improving your diet and activity can be extremely useful, but your treatment plan still needs to be monitored. If you have already had cancer, healthy lifestyle behaviors can support your overall health, but they do not replace oncology follow-up, imaging, laboratory testing, medication, surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, or any other treatment your medical team has recommended. Prevention and medicine should work together. And I also want to correct one misconception that can become dangerous. There is no lifestyle routine that can guarantee you will never develop cancer. Anyone who promises that is giving you certainty that science cannot provide. Cancer is not a moral judgment. It is not proof that someone failed to eat the right foods. It is not proof that someone did not exercise enough. And it is certainly not something we should use to blame patients. Sometimes cancer develops despite excellent habits. Sometimes it develops because of inherited genetic changes. Sometimes environmental exposures play an important role. Sometimes infections contribute. Sometimes we simply cannot identify one clear cause. Our responsibility is not to blame ourselves for every disease. Our responsibility is to reduce avoidable risk and detect problems early. That is why screening remains essential. If you are due for colorectal cancer screening, schedule it. If you are due for breast cancer screening, follow the recommendations appropriate for your age and risk. If you have a significant smoking history and meet the criteria for lung cancer screening, discuss it with your physician. If you have symptoms that concern you, do not assume they are simply part of aging. Unexplained weight loss, persistent changes in bowel habits, blood in the stool or urine, a persistent cough, unexplained bleeding, a new or changing skin lesion, persistent difficulty swallowing, or other unusual symptoms deserve medical attention. Do not diagnose yourself from a video. Do not wait for a symptom to become severe, and do not assume that a healthy lifestyle makes medical evaluation unnecessary. The best preventive strategy combines both sides of the equation, lowering risk where possible and detecting disease when it occurs. Now, if I could ask you to do just one thing after watching this entire discussion, I would not ask you to memorize every scientific pathway we covered. I would ask you to choose one habit, just one. Maybe you decide that starting tomorrow, you will take a 20-minute walk after dinner. Maybe you decide that you will stop eating in front of the television at night. Maybe you decide that your first change will be replacing one ultra-processed food with a whole food alternative at every meal. Maybe you decide that you will establish a consistent wake time. Maybe you will spend 12 minutes each morning practicing slow, controlled breathing. Choose the behavior that feels realistic enough that you can repeat it next week. Then repeat it the week after that, and the week after that. Once it becomes normal, add another. That is how you build a health routine that lasts. You are not trying to become perfect in 7 days. You are trying to become slightly more supportive of your own biology every month. And this is where the idea of prevention becomes much more encouraging. Aging does not mean that every biological process is moving in only one direction. Some changes associated with aging are unavoidable, but many markers of metabolic and physical health can improve when people change their behavior. Blood pressure can improve, insulin sensitivity can improve, muscle strength can improve, cardiovascular fitness can improve, sleep can improve, physical function can improve. Your body retains the ability to adapt. That ability is one of the most powerful resources you have. So if you are 52, start at 52. If you are 62, start at 62. If you are 72, start at 72. Do not waste another year telling yourself that it is too late. It is not. The next decade of your life is going to happen whether you change your habits or not. The question is, what kind of biological environment you want to create while that decade unfolds. You can continue eating late every night and sitting for hours without interruption. Or you can take a short walk. You can continue treating 5 hours of sleep as normal. Or you can begin protecting your sleep schedule. You can continue allowing chronic stress to consume every part of your day. Or you can create small, consistent periods of recovery and connection. You can continue relying heavily on ultra-processed foods. Or you can gradually replace them with foods that nourish you. You can continue eating from early morning until late at night. Or, if it is medically appropriate for you, you can establish a consistent eating window that gives your metabolism a predictable overnight period. None of these choices guarantees anything. But each choice is a vote for the kind of health you want to carry into the future. And when thousands of those choices accumulate, they become something much larger than individual decisions. They become your lifestyle. That is ultimately what I want you to take away from this discussion. Cancer prevention is not about fear. It is about understanding. It is about recognizing that your body has remarkable systems for repair, surveillance, adaptation, and recovery. It is about giving those systems the support they need. It is about respecting the science without turning the science into a promise it cannot make. And it is about understanding that small actions become meaningful when they are repeated. So let me bring the 5 habits together one final time. First, reduce your reliance on ultra-processed foods and gradually replace them with minimally processed, nutrient-rich foods. Second, protect your sleep and establish a consistent daily rhythm that gives your body enough opportunity to recover. Third, move every day, walk after meals, break up prolonged sitting, and maintain strength and mobility as you age. Fourth, take chronic stress seriously. Use simple recovery practices, protect your social connections, and seek professional support when stress becomes difficult to manage. Fifth, if it is appropriate for your medical situation, establish a consistent eating window and avoid unnecessary late-night calories. Then add the other pillars that we know matter. Do not smoke, limit alcohol, protect your skin from excessive ultraviolet exposure, maintain a healthy body composition without sacrificing muscle, keep up with recommended vaccinations and screening, and maintain regular contact with your healthcare team. None of this is glamorous. That is exactly why it is so powerful. The most important health decisions are often the ones that do not look impressive on social media. Going to bed on time is not impressive. Walking around the block is not impressive. Eating vegetables is not impressive. Putting your phone away is not impressive. Calling a friend is not impressive. Scheduling a screening test is not impressive. But your body does not care whether a behavior looks impressive. Your biology cares about the signals it receives, and those signals accumulate. So, if you are over 50, do not ask yourself whether you can completely eliminate cancer from your future. That is not a question anyone can honestly answer. Ask yourself a better question. What can I do today to make my body a little better equipped to handle tomorrow? That question gives you something you can actually act on. Maybe the answer today is a walk. Maybe it is an earlier dinner. Maybe it is a better night's sleep. Maybe it is replacing one processed food. Maybe it is 10 minutes of quiet breathing. Maybe it is finally making the medical appointment you have been postponing. Whatever your first step is, make it realistic, make it repeatable, and then keep going. Because prevention is not one dramatic moment. It is the accumulation of ordinary moments. And after decades of studying how disease develops and how healthy aging can be supported, that is one of the most important lessons I can offer you. Your age is not a sentence. Your past does not have to dictate every future decision. And while none of us can control every aspect of our biology, we have far more influence than we sometimes realize. Use that influence wisely. Start with one habit, build from there, and give your body the support it has been asking for all along.